Knowing where you stand, ministers propose a national ranking by test results for 11-year-old pupils in England.
Start the tests now.
Ministers say grading children's performance in core subjects will raise standards, but many head teachers are against the idea.
Giving children the idea that at 11 they're already ranked nationally at a certain level, for some children I think it will be extremely demoralising.
Ministers say there'll be more money to help poorer children. Also tonight.
We're just here to basically give you some advice on the current heat wave we're having at the moment.
Health and social workers visit the vulnerable after the Met Office issues a new heat wave alert in southeast England. Another fall in UK unemployment. It's down to 2.5 million, but the number of long-term jobless is up. A controversial plan for a third runway at Heathrow. Supporters say the UK economy will suffer without more capacity. And a warm reception for the Queen in Cumbria. But what did she say about the royal baby?
On BBC London, Barts, the country's biggest NHS trust, tells us it's in dire financial difficulties. And a police watchdog says the Met's failing to tackle complaints of racism by its officers.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. Plans to rank primary school children across England according to their test results at age 11 have run into trouble almost as soon as they were announced. Head teachers and parents have criticised the plan in which primary school pupils would be placed in one of 10 bands. Ministers say it is not a name and shame exercise, but an attempt to give parents useful information about how well their children are doing. Here's our education correspondent, Gillian Hargreaves.
11-year-olds at Brackenbury Primary in West London are in holiday mood, rehearsing the musical Grease. They may be dressed as teenagers, but are they all ready for secondary school? The government thinks too many pupils in England aren't, so they've proposed a radical shake-up of school tests. Each child would be given a ranking to show how they compare to other children. Parents are in two minds.
I think it'd be interesting to know, in a way, because you don't know at the moment at all. I don't understand any results you get from SATS tests.
It will demoralise them in a way, because it may not be that they themselves are, are not intelligent.
I don't think you should make the kids compete against each other. It seems senseless, really. They should be just trying to better themselves, for themselves, not to get ahead of the child next to them.
11-year-olds sitting national SATS tests are given a grade from 1 to 6, but the government expects them to reach at least level 4. Under this new plan, children would be ranked in 10% ability bands and be compared to other pupils across England. The government says this will be more transparent for parents. But teaching unions have almost universally condemned the idea, and some heads fear a ranking system will be too crude a measure.
Our children here, a lot of them make accelerated progress, but not all of them do, but they may do that at secondary school. So giving children the idea that at 11 they're already ranked nationally at a certain level, for some children I think it will be extremely demoralising.
The coalition also proposes tougher targets for schools and a new assessment for pupils at either 5 or 7, because they fear too many primary schools are simply coasting along.
Although most primary schools are rated as good or outstanding, the government believes a significant number do fail some children. Last year, 1 in 14 boys left primary school with the reading age of 7. That means they're years behind their peers, and almost all of them will struggle at secondary school.
Nick Clegg has made primary education one of his priorities. Today he urged all schools to raise their game.
All we're trying to make sure is that at that crucial point, just before you make that leap from primary school to big school, if I can put it that way, that you really are given all the support that you need as a young boy or girl to make that leap successfully.
Pupils at Brackenbury, like thousands of others, will find out how they did in national SATS tests over the next few days. But as these proposals won't be introduced until after the next election, it'll be today's 7- and 8-year-olds who may face even greater pressure to succeed.
And Gillian's here with me in the studio. Gillian, we heard that reaction from parents, pretty negative. How likely is this proposal to be pushed through?
Well, the coalition's talking about introducing it in 2016, but George, there's going to be a general election possibly in 2015, and the coalition might not exist at all. I've been told, though, that both the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats are absolutely wedded to this. They're convinced it's a way to raise standards. And were the Conservatives to win outright at the next election, it would be policy for them as well as for the Liberal Democrats. So two of the big parties at Westminster are signed up to it, so there's every chance it could happen.
All right, Gillian, thanks very much. Thank you. This is officially the hottest day of the year so far, with the mercury rising to nearly 32 degrees at Heathrow Airport. That's triggered a heatwave health alert for London and the South East. It means health and social workers have to contact vulnerable people like the elderly, the very young and pregnant women. Sarah Campbell reports.
Enjoying the heatwave, but the longer it continues, the more people are put at risk.
Hi, Kathy.
With the temperatures rising, Westminster Council's housing team have increased their checks on vulnerable residents to make sure they're coping with the heat.
Just keeping fans on and making sure you drink a lot. You don't seem to eat an awful lot in the hot weather either. It's quite exhausting.
And the symptoms that may be caused with the hot weather we're having.
And with the heatwave alert in London and the South East upgraded to level 3, these checks are vital.
In a level 3 alert, health and social care professionals should be looking out for particularly vulnerable people. These are people who are particularly old, the very young, and those people with chronic illnesses, particularly lung and heart disease.
Here in St James's Park in London is one of the Met Office's official temperature gauges, and it's readings from these which have triggered this level 3 alert. And that's because temperatures last night and yesterday were above a certain threshold. It varies by region, but on average it's 30 degrees by day and 15 degrees by night. And today certainly those high temperatures have continued.
Attempts to cool down have already led to tragic consequences. 4 people have drowned swimming in open water. 2, including a 16-year-old boy, died yesterday at this flooded quarry in Norfolk.
People must take heed of what happened yesterday. It's easy in hindsight to criticise people in terms of entering the water, but it is a very tempting situation. You don't know what you're going into, you don't know the underlying currents or actually what's below the surface.
Fire has swept through swathes of land in Dorset and today here in South Wales. 6 acres of tree and grassland have burned just north of the Cynon Valley. And getting hot under the collar, MPs who want to help the workforce stay cool. Currently, minimum working temperatures are subject to restriction, but there's no maximum working temperature. And a change in the law can't come soon enough. Temperatures are peaking in the southeast at the moment, but in the coming days are set to rise across the UK. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
Unemployment in the UK has fallen again and is now at its lowest level since last autumn. Youth unemployment also fell, but the number of long-term jobless hit a 17-year high. Our chief economics correspondent Hugh Pym has been talking to 2 people with very different views about the jobs market.
The number out of work has fallen again. It's now standing at 2.51 million. That level was reached after a fall of 57,000 in the 3 months ending in May compared to the previous 3 months. 2 views from different ends of the job market provide some insight into the current world of work. Carol Anderson, aged 70, is a self-employed proofreader for publishers. She works from home and is one of a growing army of older workers who don't want to quit just because they've reached the pension age.
I shall go until I drop, hopefully. That's my aim.
By working on, is it possible you're denying opportunities to younger people?
No, I don't think so. I think if you work, it keeps you healthier. Therefore, you could say we'll save the National Health a bit of money, won't we? And I don't think there's a finite amount of jobs. I think jobs create jobs.
Stephen, who's 19, is one of the younger generation trying to find work. He says employers looking for staff have a lot of people to choose from.
When someone rings up, are you looking to recruit anyone? And then they'll be like, oh, not right now, but we could get back to you. But then they end up not getting back to you. And then you end up ringing it just rings and rings and rings.
But you do think something will come along?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. Something will come along. There's always going to be something coming along.
You're 24, aren't you?
He's been helped by this jobs club in Buckinghamshire run by Connections MK. Nationally, youth unemployment has fallen. and ministers argued their policies were making a difference.
The private sector has created 1.3 million jobs since May 2010. We've also embarked on a programme of welfare reform to make the welfare state fair and affordable, but also a welfare state that incentivises people to get into work.
Unemployment in Scotland and Wales was up, and across the UK, long-term unemployment, that's the number out of work more than 12 months, was at the highest since 1996.
We were promised the biggest ever work programme since the 1920s. What we've now got is nearly 1 million people out of work long term. Now, these are exactly the people that the work programme was supposed to help back into work.
There have been ups and downs in the unemployment level in recent months, and the Office for National Statistics says the underlying trend is broadly flat. There may be encouraging signs in the latest figures, but a significant improvement in the jobs market will require sustained economic growth. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The government has published plans for new legislation to curb the influence of political lobbyists. The announcement came as Labour accused the Prime Minister of caving into the tobacco industry by shelving plans for plain cigarette packaging. David Cameron has strenuously denied that he'd been lobbied by his election strategist, Lynton Crosby, who also works for a tobacco company. Here's our political editor, Nick Robinson.
If packs of cigarettes look like this, would it stop the young from smoking? If cheap alcohol was illegal, if there was a minimum price for it, would that help tackle Britain's booze culture? The Prime Minister once seemed to think so, but not anymore. At a news conference with his Italian counterpart, David Cameron insisted that his change of mind was not produced by lobbyists.
In both these cases, decisions made very much by me as Prime Minister, consulting my cabinet colleagues, but in the end, the buck stops absolutely here. These are both decisions that I have made.
But what role, if any, did the man in the shades play? Lynton Crosby is the Australian hired hand, a strategist paid by the Tories to help them get elected.
Did you ever lobby the Prime Minister on tobacco, Lynton?
The Prime Minister's said everything that needs to be said on that issue. Thanks.
But Crosby's strategic advice company, based here in Mayfair, is also paid by a tobacco firm to lobby for them. After the Tories drew blood attacking Labour's union links, Ed Miliband and his team are desperate to embarrass David Cameron for his links with business and what the Labour leader today called a disgraceful episode.
Has he ever had a conversation with Lynton Crosby about plain cigarette packaging?
Answer the question. He's never lobbied me on anything. That carefully chosen phrase was not enough to satisfy.
It's those same weasel words he's sticking to. He can't deny that he had a conversation with Lynton Crosby about this issue. He is the Prime Minister for Benson and hedge funds, and he knows it.
Who pays lobbyists to argue behind the scenes for changes to government policy may soon be something that we have the right to know. Ironically, that's because today the government published a law on this. David Cameron says he's got nothing to hide because previous Labour Prime Ministers also had election advisers who also had business clients. Today he couldn't hide his frustration that the questions keep coming. Aren't voters entitled to a clear rather than a legalistic answer? Have you ever discussed the subject of tobacco packaging with Lynton Crosby?
This is a complete red herring, which is raised by the Labour Party because they're in political trouble, and I can't believe the BBC will fall for it. The decision not to go ahead for the time being with plain paper packaging for cigarettes is a decision taken by me with the Health Secretary for the very simple reason that there isn't yet sufficient evidence for it, and there's considerable legal uncertainty about it.
The same reasons applied, he said, to the shelving of minimum alcohol pricing, confirmed today. That and this will not be happening, not at least before an election. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
At least 22 children in eastern India have died and dozens more are ill after eating a free school lunch. Doctors believe that the poisoning, which occurred at a government school in Bihar state, may have been caused by contaminated vegetable oil. Violent protests have broken out and the government has launched an inquiry to determine if the contamination was deliberate. A senior leader of the Pakistan Taliban has written a personal letter to Malala Yousafzai, the teenager shot in the head by members of the militant group last October and who's since been treated in Birmingham. He describes the attack as shocking, but does not apologise. Well, our correspondent Orla Guerin is in Islamabad for us. Orla, this doesn't exactly sound like the Taliban regrets its actions against Yousafzai.
Absolutely not, George. It's not an apology. Nowhere do we see the words "I am sorry" or "we, the Taliban, are sorry." But nonetheless, it is an extraordinary letter from a Taliban leader to a Taliban victim. The militant Adnan Rashid says he had wanted to warn Malala to stop her anti-Taliban activities. He says he couldn't do it because he was in jail and didn't have her address. But critically, as you mentioned, he says when he got the news of the attack, that he was shocked. He even says he wished it hadn't happened. But as to whether the attack was right or wrong, he said that was a question he would leave to Allah. He also claimed Malala had not been targeted because she was campaigning for girls' education, but because she was running a smear campaign against the militants. But the letter is already being dismissed here tonight by a friend of Malala's family as a belated, confused attempt by the militants at damage control after her hugely successful appearance at the UN last Friday.
All right, Orla, thanks very much. Thank you. And the time is 16 minutes past 6. Our top story this evening. New government proposals to rank primary school children across England according to their test results. And still to come, after nearly a decade at Manchester United, could Wayne Rooney's number finally be up at Old Trafford?
Later on BBC London News, as the temperature rises, so do pollution levels, what the capital's dirty air means for our health. And final preparations, how the home of cricket is gearing up for the second Ashes test against Australia.
Now, the controversial topic of expanding Britain's airport capacity in the southeast is to the fore this week, with plans flooding into the Commission looking at how best to do it. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, is backing plans for new or expanded airports to the east and north of the capital. Then there's Gatwick, which has come up with its own plan, and today it was the turn of the UK's busiest airport, Heathrow, which unveiled new multi-billion-pound proposals to build a third runway. Our transport correspondent, Richard Westcott, reports.
It's one of the world's busiest airports, and it's full. So, not for the first time, Heathrow has unveiled controversial plans for a brand new third runway, and the owners took us up in a helicopter to show us where it might go.
We're 800 feet up, just to the south of Heathrow. Now, the airfield currently has 2 runways, and they are in use constantly, morning until night. What that means is that there's an airplane taking off and landing every 45 seconds, and that is why the owners say that they are full and they need a third runway. But look around me, look at the housing, look at the reservoirs. If you build a third runway, it costs a great deal of money, and inevitably it blights some people's lives.
They're suggesting 3 possible sites, 2 to the north of the airport and 1 to the south. Heathrow says a new runway will create 70,000 local jobs and eventually generate £100 billion for the economy. Even so, hundreds of thousands will still live under the flight path. Whole villages would be wiped out. And perhaps most worryingly for opponents, the plans don't rule out a 4th runway.
We really don't know for sure today whether you would or whether you wouldn't. And one of the key advantages of Heathrow is that we can have a 3rd new runway today, and then we could subsequently take a decision about a 4th based on the information as it becomes available.
The provision of a 3rd airport for London is no problem, according to the Thames Estuary Development Company.
They've been arguing over expanding airports since the war, yet nothing has changed. The issue is so thorny that the government has asked an independent commission to decide. Now the main players are submitting their plans. This would be the pilot's view as they came into land if London Mayor Boris Johnson got his way. He wants a new mega airport, twice the size of Heathrow, but on the other side of London in the Thames Estuary. Over at Gatwick, they have a different solution. They also want a new runway, but coupled with an extra runway at Stansted. And there are plenty of opponents, including the Liberal Democrats, who just say we should make more of what we've already got. In the village of Stanwell Moor near Heathrow, the airport affects everything they do, but locals have just learned it may be demolished to make way for a new terminal building.
Oh God, I don't think a lot of them are going to be happy. Loads of them have lived here for years, and it have been their families that lived here as well, you know, so that'd be quite hard.
But whichever plan eventually gets put forward, fares are likely to rise to help pay for it all. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
And now to one of the most talked about football transfers for years. Chelsea have finally confirmed that they've made a transfer bid for the Manchester United striker Wayne Rooney, one of England's biggest stars. But Man United's new manager insists he's not for sale. Our sports editor David Bond is at Stamford Bridge. David.
You know, George, in this glorious summer of sport, with the Ashes and Andy Murray winning Wimbledon, and of course the Open Golf starting tomorrow, football should be taking a bit of a back seat. But the problem is you can't keep the game off the front and back pages, especially when you've got two of the biggest clubs fighting over arguably the biggest player.
He's England's most gifted player and one of the most famous footballers in the world. At 27, Wayne Rooney should be in the prime of his career. Instead, his future's in turmoil. Today, in a highly unusual move, Chelsea, currently on tour in Thailand, publicly declared they had tabled a bid for the England striker. He might not have been back at Chelsea very long, but Jose Mourinho is already making mischief with Manchester United and their manager, David Moyes.
It's a problem for David to resolve, and I think if somebody is a bit worried with it is Roy Hodgson, because in a World Cup season, if Wayne is a second choice for Man United, the national team will be affected, but it's something with them, nothing with me.
Rooney's future at Old Trafford has looked uncertain ever since he told former boss Sir Alex Ferguson he wanted to leave. If anything, relations between the player and the club have got even worse since Sir Alex retired. The latest flashpoint, comments from Moyes which appeared to undermine their star player. Moyes told reporters, "Overall, my thought on Wayne is that if for any reason we had an injury to Robin van Persie, we are going to need him. I want as many options as possible." Many will wonder how it came to this, but for Rooney and United, this looks like the point of no return.
I've spoken to Manchester United this afternoon, and they've said that they've rejected Chelsea's offer and reiterated that he is not for sale. So the ball is back in Chelsea's court, and all the noises coming from Stamford Bridge are that they will come back with an improved offer. At the moment they've bid around 21 or 22 million pounds. And with the player so disaffected at Old Trafford, it now looks like Chelsea just need to come up with the right number.
All right, David, thank you very much. The organisers of Golf's Open Championship today admitted that men-only policies at golf clubs are becoming an increasingly difficult issue for the sport. Muirfield Golf Club is set to play host to the Open Championship tomorrow, but it's a club that isn't open to women members, and it seems politicians from all parties are teeing up to take a swing at its centuries-old policy. Andy Swiss reports.
It is a venue that's brought blue skies for the players, but a storm cloud for the organisers. Muirfield is one of the Open's oldest clubs, full of history, tradition and men. Women aren't allowed to be members here. Damaging discrimination? Not so, say those in charge.
On the Saturday morning, when the guy gets up, or the lady gets up and out of the marital bed, if you like, and goes off and plays golf with his chums and comes back in the afternoon, that's not on any kind of par with racial discrimination or anti-Semitism or any of these things. It's just what people kind of do.
As a private club, Muirfield's men-only membership is perfectly legal. But politicians, including Scotland's First Minister Alex Salmond, have refused to come here this week, claiming the club is out of touch. Just a few miles down the road, Whitekirk Golf Club has a flourishing female membership, and they are less than impressed.
I really don't agree with men-only clubs. It's pretty antiquated.
I think it sets a bad example to young male golfers that this is the way
that you can treat women.
Women can go as far as they like in business. So why in sport are we differentiating?
Even Augusta, the US's famously traditional home of the Masters, admitted its first female members this year, including former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. At Muirfield, the stars have been reluctant to enter the debate, but Britain's biggest name says it's time for change.
It's something that shouldn't happen these days. It's something that we shouldn't even be talking about. So, that's why I guess a lot of people don't want to talk about it.
For now, though, the female spectators here know they can't be members. At the Open, where golf's openness is under scrutiny. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Muirfield.
The Queen has let slip that she's as impatient as everyone else about the royal baby. Her comments came on a visit to Cumbria when a local schoolgirl asked whether she wanted the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's baby to be a boy or a girl. Our royal correspondent Nick Witchell takes up the story.
Make no mistake, the birth of this baby is attracting worldwide attention. Indeed, if anything, news media from outside the United Kingdom seem rather more excited about it than their British counterparts. There's just one problem at the moment. There's no baby. It's overdue. Even the Queen is starting to count the days. On a visit to the Lake District, she was asked if she was hoping for a boy or a girl.
I don't think I mind. Very much like it to ride. I'm going on holidays.
In case you missed it, the Queen said she didn't mind whether it was a boy or a girl, but she would very much like it to arrive, because she's going on holiday. Just for the record, there's more than another week before the Queen will be heading off to Balmoral. Mothers-to-be, though, aren't to be hurried. Kate, seen here at a Buckingham Palace garden party in May, is still thought to be at her parents' home in Berkshire with William. It must be assumed that she's ready to go into hospital, but for the moment, apparently, the baby is not. And so the waiting continues. We're already past Kate's due date, but that's largely irrelevant. For now, the royal doctors seem content to let nature take its course. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at St Mary's Hospital.
Time for a look at the weather now with Susan Powell. Hello.
Evening, George. Well, love or loathe the heat, and I am now hearing some people saying it's getting a bit too hot for me. There is more to come in the next few days. There will, though, be some subtle changes, so perhaps the more intense heat shifting its position across the UK to the north, where we've had more cloud recently, more in the way of sunshine on the way to Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some rain getting a little bit heavier across northern Scotland overnight tonight. A few showers in the southeast at the moment, clearing in the next few hours. Basically, though, a fine and a very warm night to come once again. In a few rural areas in Scotland and Northern Ireland, temperatures may slide down into single figures even, and further south then we see lows of maybe 19, 20, so temperatures pushing up very quickly for England and Wales once the sun gets up on Thursday, and actually those temperatures may get high enough tomorrow for us to see a few showers further west, across the southwest of England, I think, and Wales. We've seen them further east today. Tomorrow, it's likely to remain fine. It could just be a shade cooler, far from cold, I will stress that, but temperatures may just be down a degree or so because we're going to start to pull in some air from further east here. Meanwhile, for Northern Ireland and Scotland, less in the way of cloud means more in the way of sunshine, and that means the temperatures pushing up. And those are the shifts that we'll continue with as we look towards the weekend. High pollen again on Thursday, with more of an emphasis on Scotland than we've had in a little while, again for Northern England and Northern Ireland as well. Here are those subtle changes then. The high is responsible for our fine and hot weather. It just drifts further north through the end of the week and for the weekend. More cloud, I think, to come in at the east, particularly along the coast through the weekend. That could mean some cooler conditions here, and a chance just perhaps towards the end of the weekend of a few thunderstorms drifting up into the southern half of the British Isles from the continent, but still plenty of heat around, as you can see from that temperature profile. Hot spots though in the next few days likely to be further west, but we're still talking about temperatures close to 30, so more heat to come really, George.
Susan, thanks very much. Thank you. That's all from the BBC's News at 6, so it's goodbye from me, and on BBC One we now join the BBC's news teams where you are.
Tonight on BBC London News, Barts, the country's biggest NHS trust, tells us it's in dire financial difficulties. It's the latest and most high-profile trust to reveal major money problems. Also tonight. Reaction in West London as Heathrow reveals its latest ideas for expansion. We'll get the Mayor's views live. A police watchdog says the Met's failing to tackle complaints of racism by its officers. And they lost their parents in the tsunami. Now these brothers are selling flip-flops to build an orphanage in India. Hello and good evening. It's the country's biggest NHS trust, made up of